Welcome, alumni, parents, and friends of Mercersburg Academy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jen Smith, Mercersburg class of 1997, parent of 2 current students and Dean of Academics. Thank you for being here with us. Tonight, we will hear from 4 distinguished alumnae across the reunion cycles about their careers in the world of science, technology, engineering, and math. Brendle Owens, class of 91, Lexa Treml, class of 16, Stephanie Turner McGraw, class of 06, and my colleague, Julia Stojak Maurer, class of 1990, and parent classes of 18, 20, 22, and 23. Please note that we are recording this session, and please use the Q&A feature to share your questions with our panelists. Thank you for being a part of the 2021 Distinguished Reunion Speaker Series. Dr. Brendle Owens, 91, is head of mathematics at the University of Glasgow. Her expertise is in the field of geometric group theory. She was named a Fellow of the American Mathematical Society in 2020 and was elected to Fellowship of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, Scotland's National Academy this year. She enjoys spending time with family and friends on the Isle of Bute on Scotland's west coast. Tara can't be here with us tonight as it's well past midnight in Scotland, but she's prepared a video to share with us.
Hello, I'm Brendle Owens. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this panel. I wish I could be with you all live, but it'll be well after midnight here in Scotland when you all get started. So I've been invited to send in this short video instead. Now, I'm a mathematician. Math was a subject I often enjoyed in school, but I never wanted to be a mathematician. I didn't even know what that was until I was kind of already in the middle of being one. So what I'm hoping to do in this talk is give you a small snapshot of how I became a mathematician and what that means, at least for me, and also some of the people who helped me to achieve this. Now, I grew up in Mercersburg, and I decided that I needed to start my story at JB Middle School. I was doing grade ahead math there with an amazing teacher, Mr. Stevens. When I got to 8th grade, we were out of grades ahead. So what Mr. Stevens did was he got the book that the Academy was using for 9th grade geometry. And as I understand things now, he gave up his free period every day for a year to teach it to me, so that when I got to the Academy, I could go straight to Mr. Carstenson's Algebra 2 and Trigonometry class. And I should mention that Mr. Carstenson basically did the same thing 4 years later. When I was a senior, he taught me from a linear algebra textbook that turned out to be the textbook that my college used for freshmen. Anyway, so I graduated from Mercersburg. There's me and my sister, Suzanne, another woman with a STEM background. She did biology and studio arts at Smith College. Anyway, I graduated from Mercersburg extremely well prepared for college. So I got to Haverford, and there's me together with Nicole, then Lehman. So 2 Mercersburg alum made up 2 of the 5 Haverford math majors graduating in our year from Haverford. Then it was on to Columbia University in New York to do my PhD. And the reason you see Mr. Bergen's picture there is I was home in Mercersburg over the summer before I moved to New York to start my PhD work, and got a phone call that Mr. Bergen wanted to see me. And of course, it had been 4 years since I'd graduated Mercersburg, but I still remember sort of having that feeling of you've been summoned to the headmaster's office and, you know, what have I done wrong sort of thing. But it turned out that Mr. Bergen very kindly wanted to give me 5 mathematics books that he had used when he was doing his own PhD studies in mathematics at Princeton. And I really wanted to show you those books as part of this, but they're in my office at work. And unfortunately, because of the lockdown situation in Scotland at present, I'm only allowed to go there for essential reasons. And I decided this really didn't quite count as an essential reason. So, but they're on my shelf in my office and I've used them a lot. So thank you so much, Mr. Bergen. I hope you're watching this. Anyway, so I got my PhD under the supervision of Joan Berman, who is a trailblazing mathematician working in topology. And I went on to do a postdoc at Cornell University under the supervision of Professor Karen Voigtman, a leading geometric group theorist. And I got my first tenure track job at Louisiana State University, which has an excellent research group in topology. And then moved to Glasgow in 2008, where I'm now a professor and head of mathematics. So that's sort of my professional trajectory, but of course, along the way, life happens. And when I was a PhD student, I met my husband, who's also a mathematician, and that's a picture of us having just been married in the chapel where Mr. Smith played the organ for us. It's lovely. And while we were at LSU, our older daughter, Grania, was born. And soon after we got to Glasgow, our daughter, Audrey, joined us. And so, one of the challenges in any career is balancing it with, home and family and life in general. And so I really wanted to take this opportunity to give a shout out to Veronica, now Dr. Veronica Kirkpatrick. She is a veterinary surgeon in England right now. And I met her, she was walking across the campus at the University of Glasgow. I saw this young woman wearing a Mercersburg shirt, so I had to stop her. Turned out she was an undergrad there studying zoology. And it also turned out she was a fully qualified nanny. She became our family's beloved babysitter. And she's just been a wonderful part of our lives. So here's a photo from her wedding at Culzean Castle down in Ayrshire. And those are my girls as her flower girls. So just wanted to say thank you, Veronica. I could not have done anything in my career, I think, without the help that you have given me. So what do mathematicians actually do? This is a question that I get a lot, and which I really didn't know the answer to until I started doing this, as I said before. So that's what I sort of want to wrap up with, is just give you a sample of the kinds of activities a mathematician does on a day-to-day basis. And I think a lot of us are aware that mathematicians do teaching. So sorry, this is the best picture that I had of myself actually in front of a blackboard. We do a lot of teaching. First and foremost, that is what we do. We teach students at all levels. We teach undergraduates, master's students, PhD students, postdocs. We teach each other. We sometimes work with younger students. So obviously that's an important part of what we do, and it's something I really love about my job. But we also do research. This is an important part of what we do too. And my research is about braids, which is probably not what comes to mind when most people think about math. But there's so many unexpected connections, and there's so much hidden structure here. And I'll just give two examples. So this is a picture of what a mathematician would probably draw if they were trying to draw a nice picture of a braid. And it turns out this is a really useful framework for understanding solutions of polynomial equations. That's just one example of a hidden connection. It's also a useful framework for describing systems of objects moving around factory floors without crashing into each other. So this is an online grocer's factory floor. My research is not directly about the applications. I do what's usually described more as fundamental research, abstract structures. And when you're doing this kind of fundamental research, you don't necessarily know where or if it will be useful. And that can be frustrating. But I think it's really important that we as a society do this. We're training the next generation with this methodology and skill set. If we're good at spotting these connections that tell us a braid is actually something to do with polynomials and something to do with particles moving on a surface, if we're good at spotting these underlying structures, then as a society, we'll be ready for whatever comes our way. And I also just wanted to say that, mathematics, at least for me, is never done in isolation. And I've been really lucky to have some incredible research collaborators in the past, and here they are. So thank you to them as well. So those are two crucial things that we do, teaching and research. But depending on who you talk to, my inability to say no to things is either my greatest professional strength or my greatest weakness. I also end up doing a lot of what you might call extracurricular service work. But I usually take on things because I think they're interesting or important, or ideally both. And I'm just going to end by giving you two examples. So one example is I do a lot of work with government funding bodies, anywhere from funding specific funding recommendations to policy review. So I've worked with UKRI, the US National Science Foundation, and recently with the Swedish Research Council. So I'm also currently doing some work on the question of equity in these processes, which is very important and an area where there's a lot of interest and activity at the moment. And my last example is I've been involved in a Scottish government working group called Making Maths Count. So here in the UK, math has an S at the end. And our working group was tasked with helping Scotland be a maths positive nation. And so one thing we did was set up an annual Maths Week Scotland. It's just an annual week every year where we just celebrate math in our everyday lives. And I'm showing you an example of one of our ads for that. And another thing we did was we partnered with the Scottish Open Golf Tournament. And this was a lot of fun. We had a Maths on Flags competition for school kids of all ages, from elementary school up to high school. So what we did was, instead of having the flags, the normal golf flags that are numbered 1 through 18, we had kids make up mathematical expressions that evaluate to those numbers. So you see some of the winning entries there that the kids are holding up. Here's a close-up of one of them. So I think I'll end there by letting you all work out which hole that belongs to on the golf course. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you. And greetings from Scotland. Wish I could be there with you all. Bye now.
So I think we're going to go next to Lexa Treml. Lexa, would you like to speak a little bit about your background and your experience?
Of course, and just a great video that that Tara had. That was lovely. My name is Lexa Treml. I'm class of 2016 from Mercersburg. I'm lucky enough to have a little sister who is an upper middler at Mercersburg now, so I get to stay connected to the community. I attended James Madison University when I graduated Mercersburg and got my degree in integrated science and technology, which is a more rare degree, but it ended up being great. I started in vocal performance. I did a lot of arias and opera when I was at Mercersburg and couldn't quite decide, but when I got to college, I realized I really missed the science labs and the math and things of that nature. So I changed my major and concentrated within that in biotechnology and robotics, and taught myself some data science along the way, which was really fun to be able to go not only into the robotics that I touched on in high school, but then at a college level as well, to be able to learn about biotech and learn about more of the physics and thermodynamics and be able to apply that to the drones that I was building in college. But I do have to say, I have to back up and say thank you so much to Dr. Maurer, who started my entire STEM journey, as well as my partner when I was in robotics at Mercersburg, Joanna Santos, who is now off to pursue her PhD in mechanical engineering at Stanford, and could not be more proud. Joanna and I made it to the national competition for RoboCup Junior, and then the international competition along with Connor Crusoe. And it was such an eye-opener. And it actually directly feeds into my career, which I currently work for Booz Allen as a contractor for the DoD for the Office of Secretary of Defense, the Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation Innovation Lab. So all that to say, I still get to build robots and build models, and I could not be happier. I also wanted to say that I was one of those people who was afraid of math when I was in high school, and I want to definitely say that people should not be afraid of math. I've definitely learned through my the rest of high school and college that math can be really beautiful and just has so many applications that aren't just trying to stare at a white page and figure out what function you're supposed to be using or what formula you're supposed to be using. There are so many just applications. Like a lot of what I do is computer programming and just figuring out the code or the logic that you're going to use. Very little numbers in that, and it's always a challenge and a puzzle, and that's maybe something that you don't get as much in STEM. After the like quiz taking and the test taking, you just get to dive in and do experiments, and that's definitely what I love most. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Lexa. We'll turn next to Stephanie.
Thank you. So my name is Stephanie Turner McGraw, class of 2006. I am now surprisingly all grown up and a clinical psychologist and assistant clinical professor who works out of WVU Medicine, our Eastern campus in Martinsburg, West Virginia. I divide my time between a clinical appointment where I diagnose and treat psychological and psychiatric illness, and a teaching appointment where I am the director of our doctoral internship program, and I train psychology interns, psychology fellows, medical students, and medical residents through our integrated primary care clinic in Harpers Ferry. When I was thinking about what I could talk about today, I really think that it's important just to trace my journey. So when I think back to when all of this started, I wanted to be a psychologist long before I had any actual business wanting to be a psychologist. I was 13 years old and my older cousin had just died of a heroin overdose. At the time, I had no idea what a psychologist did, and I had never even met one in the wild. But like many people drawn to healthcare, I wanted to understand and I wanted to heal. And since teenage brains are inherently egocentric, I wasn't quite able to differentiate my desire to heal from my desire to heal others. But in that moment, the decision to be a psychologist, it came so quickly and with such certainty. It was as if a part of me had ever known or had always known. No, I wouldn't actually come face to face with a psychologist for another 4 years after a particularly challenging chapter of my Mercersburg career, where my partner at the time was expelled for being caught with marijuana. Nope, irony is definitely not lost on me. But if truth be told, I really disliked my first therapist, and I found the experience kind of awful. It was nothing that I thought it would be. It wasn't illuminating, it wasn't healing. But wouldn't you know, these were minor details. Continued on the path. And so when I graduated Mercersburg in 2006, I pursued my bachelor's degree at Pitzer College in Claremont, California. And since Mercersburg had prepared me so well, I found the transition to be exceptionally easy. So easy, in fact, that I graduated 3 years later with honors and double majors of psychology and English and world literature. Shortly thereafter, I knew I wanted to pursue a doctoral degree, and so I began preparing for the GRE. And that's when I turned back to other lessons that Mercersburg had taught me. Specifically, when you're preparing for the SATs and they tell you these encouraging things like, it's all right, you'll get 200 points just for writing your name, I know firsthand that that is a lie. That, as it turns out, if you spell your name wrong on the SATs, they give you the 200 points just out of pity. And then you spend the next several years getting college mail to Stephanie Tuesnes. I think that this this blunder is just such a pivotal point in my journey as a woman pursuing a healthcare profession, pursuing a faculty appointment, that when I think back to those early tests and the SATs, I had a lot of misconceptions about what they were and what they measured. I didn't prepare for the SATs because I thought it was an intelligence test, that there was no reason to prepare. That even in a world that prepares us as much as Mercersburg prepares us for everything, somehow I missed that class or that memo. And I think that there are a lot of assumptions that we make based on popular culture or based on the majority demographic that we teach to. And so when I think about what it means to be a woman in healthcare, a woman in STEM, I think slowing down and assessing what we know and what our students know and having these conversations can be so transformative and life-changing, that we know that there are very real, long-lasting social effects of being able to look to models in whatever world or field or demographic we're in, but to see people doing important things who look like us, that their journeys elevate us. And for many, many years in our culture, that the people who have been elevated the most have been white men, especially as it relates to STEM fields. And so I think that one path forward is really being deliberate about having these conversations about mentorship with women, and for women, for girls, to build these relationships where they're able to see their teachers, their leaders, the people in these roles who look like them, expressing emotional authenticity, talking about their struggle and talking about their vulnerabilities, so they may feel more comfortable asking the questions and expressing the uncertainty. That I know that for me and my mentors in this field, those moments have been transformative and allowed me to feel, I won't say confident, but to be willing to risk failure, to throw my hat in the ring. So much so that when I completed my doctoral program and I was getting ready to graduate, I saw a job posting for a faculty psychologist in Martinsburg, close to my home where I wanted to be. And I remember thinking, gosh, this would be the perfect job for me in 5 years. I said this to both of my supervisors at the time, both of which are exceptional human beings. And one was a man, and he held the space for me, and he was compassionate and kind and loving. But the other was a woman. And her response, while equally compassionate, also challenged me to push forward. And she said, what would be different in 5 years? Why wait 5 years when you can apply now? And that idea was terrifying. But I did, and I'm here. And it's been a journey, but I am so grateful for all of my teachers. And I hope to be able to elevate the voices of women in academia, elevate where we need to go next, and be a stepping stone for others to come. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing that with us. Our fourth panelist, we'll hear now from Dr. Julia Maurer.
Hi, everyone. So good to be on with you, all of you tonight, and happy to share just a little bit of my story, which really started at Mercersburg. I had always loved math and science in school. When I was at Mercersburg, I had some really excellent teachers, and I was encouraged to apply for an internship at NASA. And so in high school, I held 2 different internships at NASA over the summer. First one was with a scientist, and after that, and that was interesting. And at the time I was trying to decide between science and engineering. And I had asked my supervisor at NASA next year to put me with an engineer. And the next year I got put in the robotics lab at Goddard Space Flight Center. And I just totally fell in love. I was writing programs for robotic applications of satellites. And that was it for me. I knew I wanted to go to engineering school. I applied and got into a great program at the University of Dayton. And I chose Dayton on purpose, very deliberately, because it had one of the highest numbers of undergraduate women in the country in their engineering program at the time. They were ranked number 3 in the country. And so I went off and I went to school with, I was lucky to have women in the engineering program with me. I was a chemical engineering undergrad. I was able to do some research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on fiber optics. And as I kept studying, I was really intrigued by materials, and I continued to be really interested in programming. So I graduated and I was a professional programmer for a year, about a year and a little bit after graduation. I knew I wanted to go back to graduate school. And so I went back to Dayton and I met my advisor, Dr. Danny Elon, who became the most wonderful advisor for me. He actually secured a National Science Foundation grant for me that first year to be able to quit my job as a programmer and start my master's degree in materials engineering. And I had a concentration in light metals and in particular titanium. I worked on biomedical applications of titanium, strengthening microstructures for specifically for hip replacement parts. And then about a year and a half in, our college applied for a Darpa Miri grant, which was a national call from the DoD. They were looking to solve the problem of catastrophic airline failure. In the late 80s, airplanes were having massive, they basically had run out in their lifespan and were just like having these massive fall out of the sky kind of moments. And the DoD was looking to solve some of those problems for both military and civilian aircraft uses. And so we ended up being in the finalists against UC Berkeley and ended up winning the contract. And so I was fortunate to get into the beginning of that research. And I had chosen to work on non-destructive evaluation of critical titanium airspace parts, specifically the fan blades in the engine. Because when a fan blade fails in mid-flight, it's essentially like a bomb going off on the plane. The engine blows and often the plane falls out of the sky and kills everybody on board. So it tends to be a very serious failure. And so we worked on identifying cracks before they existed in critical titanium components, specifically the fan blades. All aircraft fly with cracks in them. Most people don't realize that. And you just have to catch them in critical components before they go to catastrophic failure. And that's what my partner and I worked on that. We worked on that for 4.5 years. In the end, we turned all of our research, the lab worked on like basically every aspect of the plane. There were 25 graduate students. I ended up being able to stay in the program because I got a Claire Booth Luce grant, which was a national grant, to be able to continue my doctoral work after the NSF grant ran out. And Danny was instrumental in helping with that as well. And then after we finished our research and turned it all over, I was able to graduate. I went back for my 10-year reunion. At that point, I thought I would become a college professor and teach engineering. One of the things I ran into in my path is that I didn't see myself as a professor. So I had lots of wonderful professors, very few, only one really female engineering professor. And I thought it would be nice for young women to see themselves in those professional roles. And to be mentors. That's what I really wanted to be. I really wanted to teach. When I started interviewing at colleges, however, my research was so specific and it takes so long to learn the kind of microscopy that I did, transmission electron microscopy. Every college just wanted me to continue that research, but it's very lonely research. It takes place in usually the basement of a building in a pitch black room, staring at a phosphorescent screen for hours on end. And I was a little bit done doing that research after doing it for years and years on end. And I really wanted to teach and work with students. And I came back for my 10-year reunion and I ran into Jim Malone and Neil Carstensen. And they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm trying to find a teaching professorship." And they're like, "You should teach at Mercersburg." And that launched my career. I ended up being a math and physics opening that year. And I applied and had the position. I started teaching at Mercersburg in 2001, teaching math and physics. And then shortly after that, I became the first female math department chair at Mercersburg. And then I launched the robotics program in 2004, and it's still going strong. This year we've been at, I think, 11 different international competitions, and we were kept from going to one because of H1N1 that year. We didn't get to go to Australia, even though we could have. And or that was Austria, sorry, that was Austria. And it's been the most wonderful journey here, teaching math and robotics, and now I serve the school as the associate head of school for school life. So that's a little bit about my journey.
Thank you, Julie. We're going to go now to some Q&A, and I'm going to encourage everybody who's in the audience tonight to please put some questions in the Q&A if you have any for our panelists. And the first question that I'm going to ask, this came up while Stephanie was giving her background, but I think that it would be great to hear from any of you. Who were some of your role models at Mercersburg? Stephanie, I'm going to call on you first.
Go for it. So I actually was prepping for some of the rapid fire questions I think we're going to get to later. And so I was thinking a lot about my teachers at Mercersburg, and I was just remembering fondly Gift and Tom Foose and Matt Kearney and Andy Schroer and love of my life, Carl Reisner, Dave Holsworth. That just, I think, so I'm going to backtrack on all of the female empowerment things that I had just said for 1 second, because I noticed when I was thinking about these teachers, they were men. I was taught by a lot of men, and that was so transformative for me coming to Mercersburg, because I had come from a local public school system where I think before Mercersburg, I didn't have a single male teacher. So I remember that there was just this like very interesting transition. And I had to do a lot of processing and think about like what the implication of that was. But I loved all of my teachers. And I noticed at Mercersburg, I especially loved being taught and having my voice elevated and valued by these male role models. And so I think that is so important. And I think it's also important that we have gender equity in these models. And so I would just love everyone to be able to teach everyone all of the time. But I know that is not the way the world works. We can't have everyone on faculty for all of ever. So that's where I am.
Thanks, Stephanie. Lexa or Julie, do either of you want to talk about your role models at Mercersburg?
I can go. I already mentioned Dr. Maurer, and I also should mention Jen Smith, because she was my diving coach and rock climbing coach, and those were two things at Mercersburg that also really transformed who I was in college and how I spend my free time now, and empowering me to know that I was stronger than I thought I was. Also, Pete Gunkelman, for the same reason of pushing me and making me realize how much stronger you are than just what you think. Dave Holsworth made physics so fun. Mrs. Hicks I had for chemistry, and that was another time where I kind of just fell in love with science, and I was like, this is so cool. Everything is so cool about this, and just doing science experiments. I also have to shout out to the incredible labs at Mercersburg, the robotics lab. I spent so much time in the chemistry labs. I mean, there are benches and benches, and I didn't realize that other high schools, they don't have, like, you don't do a science experiment every day. And that was transformative for me, definitely. Even in college, we did them once a week, and I was like, this is, we could do more. And that's how I found myself into these maker spaces in college. And then Mr. Brinson was a huge person in my life, just because I did a lot of singing and chapel choir and pretty much every choir. So I'll end there.
Well, for me, Jim Malone was a huge part of my Mercersburg experience, for sure. He was my pre-calculus teacher and my Trek coach. So I did Trek my senior year, and there are a lot of fond memories from that. Brent Gift, my volleyball coach, for sure. And Sue Wooten, who really taught me how to write. I really learned how to write from Sue Wooten, and I really appreciated my time with her, for sure. And I also just want to shout out to Walter Bergen, who was my headmaster at the time. But I really appreciated the connection that I had with Mr. Bergen at the time when I was a student. I remember those moments fondly.
Thanks, everyone. The next question is, was it hard to find female mentors? And I think this question is more than just Mercersburg. How would you encourage young people, specifically girls, to consider a career in STEM industries? So it's two parts of the same question.
I think that it starts in early childhood. I think it comes down to the fact that we know that women hold about 86% of the purchasing power in the country. And so women are making decisions by and large for the first toys that we purchase for children. And there's this lovely documentary, if everyone hasn't seen it, called Misrepresentation. They also have, it's about media and female gender identity and what that looks like. And there's also the companion, the male documentary called The Mask We Live In. They're just wonderful, very illuminating. But one of the things I talk about in the documentary, do a comparison of children's toys. And even when we look at something like, that should be gender neutral, like Duplo box, like those early kind of 2-year-old Legos, that there's the primary color, the bright ones that come in kind of the construction kit. And then there are the pastel floral, like very baby pink and then baby purple. And I think that it starts before we ever realize that it starts. And so trying to make conscious decisions about why you are buying what for the children in your life, all of these things matter and they build up over time. Like why you're choosing this activity or this extracurricular to enroll them in versus others. So I would start young.
I think I'm the oldest panelist here, so for sure. And so I started my engineering journey in 1990. Like I said, I made a very deliberate choice with Dayton because my chemical engineering class, we were 25 of us in the undergraduate class, and half were female, half were male. So I was really fortunate to have peers. I did not have many mentors. I had one female mentor, and she was pivotal in my life. She served on my doctoral committee, but I was lucky to have men in my life who served as mentors, who were real champions of increasing women, particularly in the field of engineering, and specifically PhDs in engineering. So Dr. Tony Saliva, who is still at the University of Dayton, and my son is actually there now studying, and they've connected, which is really special for me. He was my undergraduate mentor, and Danny Elon was my graduate professor. I worked 6 years with Danny very closely, and he had mostly women in he was very, very active in securing grants for women to get their doctorates. It was a huge passion of his to be able to support women. And to him, it didn't matter if we had children along the way and we grew our families. He supported everything about being a woman in that journey. And I was so incredibly fortunate and he's a giant in the field of titanium engineering research. And so I was so fortunate to be able to study with him. And so I think that, the key is to find the people who are willing to support you. And then I always tell, one of the things I always say when I do panels like this is you have to turn around and do that for others. So and be that mentor for other people. And that's the only way that we're gonna expand and encourage others to follow the same paths, or paths that are at least similar. So I've had great mentors. Not many of them were women in the field though. And we actually just lost Danny to COVID. And so it's been a really heavy spring for me for that reason. But what a wonderful giant of a man who helped so many women in the field.
I think I owe a lot to my mom, who gave me all of the science toys and the science kits and the things that blow up, and promoting me to ask a lot of questions, even if they resulted in like making a mess or doing an experiment in the kitchen or that sort of thing. So I definitely agree that a lot of the passion and the spark is from when you're growing up and you're just curious, or just playing outside. And then I was pretty fortunate to have a lot of mentors, especially through internships throughout high school and college, to kind of open my eyes to what they do and to what other people around them were doing. And that type of networking is absolutely what got me to where I am. And then I think for promoting STEM among young women, I think it's again making sure to open other people's eyes to how many possible careers there are. I had no idea that you could be a marine biologist, or you could be someone in the biomedical field, or you could be a computer scientist, and that a lot of these things overlap, and that there are these really small you can't major in everything that you can be. It's really diverse, and you can kind of make your own path wherever you are. And so I think people who think, oh, I'm not good at physics, or physics is really tough for me, even you can take pieces that you like and put it into something else, into biology, into chemistry, into marketing and business and soft sciences. So that would be my advice.
Great, thank you all for that. We have another question here. This one's from Charlie Bell. He says, Tara mentioned a national effort to make Scotland more math positive. To each of you, if you ruled the US, what would you do to try to make the US more math positive for all, and especially for girls and women?
I listened to a podcast from TED Radio Hour maybe a few months ago, and it was on the math that is in music and in rhythms. And in the same episode, I believe, there was a middle school teacher, a high school teacher, who was teaching physics with, or I guess it was high school, physics with Star Wars. And so he realized that people weren't really interested in learning the like typical kinematic equation with like the ball and the string and that sort of thing. And so he challenged his class to do like, oh, well, how long would it take for someone to I don't know, jump with your lightsaber, whatever. And the class had an overwhelming positive mindset towards learning physics from then on. I don't really remember the question at this point, but I think that's a really fun way, interesting way to get people kind of involved in different ways.
I'd love to start young. I think way before the level that where we are in the at Mercersburg at high school, but in grade schools and elementary schools, and to find ways to gamify it, to gamify math, and have it be less about learning the pure arithmetic or math, but how the connections happen, and making that a fun journey, and making sure the people that are introducing that to students bring that kind of energy and enthusiasm around it. So for instance, I have a 11-year-old daughter, and a year and a half ago, I started teaching her coding, but I started teaching it through a game. And so she's coding right now she's coding in Python. She's learning HTML right now. And it's all been a game to her. And she's like, well, this is easy because it's a game. And and my other daughter, who's in high school, the same thing. She did it through we did building a website to, and just how that would work. And so it takes kind of I think it's just the approach, and maybe less testing and more practical application, really making it fun, asking, even at my daughter's young 11 years, there are things that she would like to do with the coding. And so giving her some autonomy to do those things in school would be lovely, so that she could really work on something that interests her. And through that process, she's learning real skills, and it's not quite so scary. And it's actually pretty fun at the end. I think robotics is an awesome way to teach a lot of those, because the robots you can see the results right away. So it would mean a lot of revamping, but I think that's where if I were president, Charlie, I think that's what you asked. That's where I think I would start.
Yeah, I agree. I think, we know that different people learn in different ways, and more people report increased academic engagement when they're able to have hands-on activities. So anything to make math, science feel more applicable. And I mean, honestly, if I were in charge of the world, I would also do the practical things, like we need to teach children about how to balance a checkbook and how to manage finances and how to invest. And maybe that's a door in for application, but showing them that there are real world implications from this work that we're learning.
Great, thanks everyone. Lexa, Jen Bradley is asking, can you share the name of the podcast that you mentioned?
I think it's by TED Radio Hour, and it's called Solve for X. That's definitely the name, and I think by TED, or it might be Radio Lab, but Solve for X.
Great, thanks. And then sort of as a follow-up, do any of the three of you have some good podcast recommendations for everybody who's listening?
Does Murder, Mystery, and Makeup count? Because I'm a big fan.
I'm not a huge podcast consumer, so I don't have, I'm more a book or kind of TED Talk person. So.
I love TED Radio Hour. They're not all about math, but they're all really interesting. Radio Lab is another favorite, also just talking about, some of them are about like emotions and like pop culture and that sort of thing, but a lot are about just thinking about things differently. And then on that, there's Invisibilia. I love espionage, which is kind of like murder mysteries. But yeah.
Another question coming from Jen Bradley. This is, we'd love to hear from Stephanie on this, but really everybody. How has the dialogue around mental health changed for young people since you were a teenager?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's especially relevant now as we're continuing through the global pandemic of COVID-19. I actually gave a talk this morning to our Eastern Panhandle Health and Human Service Collaborative, where we're touching on the prolonged impacts of adjusting to a world in the midst of this pandemic. And one of the things that we know is that traditionally with pandemics, there is an initial decline in suicide rates followed by an increase relative to the suicide rates that were happening before the pandemic. The good news is at this point that we haven't seen an overall significant increase in our suicide rates in the US. However, there is some preliminary data out of England that was showing that last spring and summer during the initial lockdown, there was increased suicide rates amongst their children and teenagers. And I just think that we're having these conversations more now than when I was a teenager, that we have a lot of really great models, both in celebrities and everyday people who are stepping up and writing memoirs and sharing their stories, that I hear from my patients all the time that I'm still out on this, but they have their TikTok psychologist that they love watching, and then they come in and sometimes they have very good information, very insightful information that they're bringing in. So, right now I'm okay with it. But I think the piece is that we're seeing more representation. We're seeing people be emotionally authentic and vulnerable and not just put on the mask and pretend that everything's okay. That we're able to come together more and talk about these issues without it being as pathologizing or pejorative. And that only creates opportunity for connection and healing. So I am inspired about where we are now relative to where we've been in the past. And I also think that there is going to be a real importance for continuing these conversations in the coming years, so we can try to save as many people as we can.
Thank you, Stephanie. Did anybody else have anything to add to that? Another one from Charlie Bell, and this one is, based on your observations, not necessarily data-driven, which STEM fields seem most and least popular among girls and women? Have these been changing over the past decade or two?
As a recent college graduate, I think biology is the most prevalent for women. I have a lot of friends who are currently pursuing masters in biology or neurology or or the health sciences, nursing, and in my major, which was integrated science and technology, there were not that many women, and even less in my engineering classes, and even less in the computer science classes that I was in. So I think, I don't know, I would love for there to be more women and more representation in the applied science and the applied engineering realm.
I think physics still has, we even see it in classes here, in terms of the advanced studies physics. So I think that's a place where we can certainly encourage more girls to continue to study. That's, I think, in colleges too, in terms of going on to pursue a physics degree. Within engineering, civil engineering has tended to be lower in terms of women, and the bio and biomechanical and chemical has had, in my experience, more women in that. So there's a spectrum, I think, within engineering curriculum.
All right, I think at this point, we're going to move on to the rapid fire questions. So the way this is going to work, I'll ask a question and I'll have each of the three of you answer it. We'll go Lexa, then Stephanie, then Julie, and then I'll share Tara's answer, which she provided us ahead of time. And we'll just go through these very quickly. The first one is favorite Mercersburg tradition.
I know this isn't really a thing anymore, but I loved Paint the Numbers.
Oh, it's a thing.
Okay, good.
So I am a Mercersburg women's lacrosse alum, and so my favorite tradition might not be known by all, but we were put through a scavenger hunt of sorts over my tenure to find the hidden master key of Mercersburg. It was just the best time, the best.
Mine is declamation.
And Tara says that she always enjoyed Irving Marshall. You all touched on this already, but you have to just pick one now. Favorite Mercersburg teacher?
I'm gonna pick Mr. Brinson.
Carl Reisner, hands down.
Mr. Malone.
And Tara says that she's going to go with Jim Smith, who sadly is no longer with us. And she mentions that he was a huge and inspirational figure in her life in so many ways: chorale, AP music theory in 10th grade, and supervising her scholarship job. She could go on for pages. Irving or Marshall?
Marshall.
Irving.
Irving.
Tara says Irving. Favorite spot on campus?
The Moat Barn.
Lenfest.
The chapel.
Tara says Erin's statue. Erin Carey was her classmate and her good friend, and she visits there every time she's home in Pennsylvania. Favorite Mercersburg extracurricular?
Climbing.
Women's lacrosse.
This is impossible to pick, so I have to say all of mine because I truly don't have a favorite, but I worked on the farm, which I loved when we had a school farm. Hello, Mr. Carstensen, because he was my farm leader. Volleyball, and I played with Tara, and so we were on the same team, and track with Mr. Malone. They were all amazing. I can't pick a favorite, sorry.
Tara says volleyball, so another volleyball there.
Good.
Pretzel pie or chocolate chip cookie pie?
Chocolate chip.
Listen, I don't know what this chocolate chip blasphemy is, but pretzel pie.
Absolutely pretzel pie, like no question.
And Tara says chocolate chip, hands down.
What? I don't even remember a chocolate chip pie. I was there for 4 years.
Last of these rapid fire questions. What is on your nightstand right now?
A book is on my nightstand. I'm currently reading Dawn of the Code War.
Yes, that sounds lovely. I am also having a book on my nightstand. Good night, construction site.
I have Stamped from the Beginning. It's one of my deep dives into the history of racism in America.
Good.
Tara says she has a copy of Thackeray's Vanity Fair, which she's reading for a mini book club with 2 friends. So this actually brings us to a close, and I want to thank all of our panelists, and also I want to thank all of you who are in the audience tonight for joining us this evening. We hope that you will visit mercersburg.edu/events to register for many other upcoming events. So thank you, everybody.